Welcome back, life science learners, to the rest of our lesson. We're focusing on biodiversity and looking at classification today. We've just looked at the importance of concepts such as species diversity, genetic diversity, and ecosystem diversity. We're discussing all of this in the context of South Africa. In this part of the lesson, guys, we're going to be focusing on biodiversity and endemism in South Africa. What does that mean? Let's take note of the following. There are 11 types of biomes in the world, and South Africa is unique in that it has 7 of these 11 types. And that's a huge plus for us as South Africans, the benefit of having 7 unique biomes to South Africa, something that is unique to South Africa. And we've looked at that and the distribution of these biomes in the past, and we know that we've got our savanna, we've got our different biomes, and that's a good illustration for us to be able to look at and identify where these biomes are. What's important is that these biomes are home to some indigenous species as well as the endemic species. So let's try and unpack that and move on to the significance of endemism in South Africa. So, as I mentioned, it's also important for us to recognize that 3 of the world's biodiverse hotspots are found in South Africa. And these are areas with especially a high number of endemic plant species. So why do we recognize these as hotspots? Firstly, these areas are areas that have a high concentration of endemic plant species. What does that mean? It means that if we look at these areas, these endemic species are concentrated in specific areas that are found nowhere else in the world, and that makes them significantly important from an ecological perspective. It means that these areas need to be protected, as those plants are probably not found, are definitely not found anywhere else, and hence they are regarded as hotspots and need to be conserved and protected. One, because if we lose these, we're probably going to lose them and we will not have them anywhere else in the world. And second, they provide a source of tourist attraction to South Africa, where many indigenous local populations benefit from that, as well as we've got tourism from travelers from around the world that actually visit these hotspots to enjoy the splendor of what we have. So let's look at that in a bit of detail. As I mentioned, these are the different biomes that are found in South Africa. It's important that we have recognized these and we understand the different types of fauna and flora that are present in these unique biomes. Again, it's important that we recognize that biomes are areas that are characterized by the climate, the type of plants and animals that are uniquely found in those areas. And that is how we differentiate our South African biomes into these 7 different biomes. Right, so let's move on to the importance of biodiversity and its significance to us from an international perspective. Guys, when we look at South Africa, we've got the Cape Floral Kingdom. This is the smallest of the 6 plant kingdoms in the world, but it has the largest number of plant species per square kilometer. Almost 80% of the species are endemic. So guys, we're talking about an area that has the largest number of endemic species, with a high concentration of approximately 80% of these species being endemic. So this makes it a significantly important hotspot globally. What's also important for us to recognize is that we have the renowned wildlife that attracts millions of tourists to South Africa. The Kruger National Park is home to the Big 5. And we know that we as local South Africans enjoy the splendor of being able to admire these treasures of Africa, of South Africa. And hence they form a significant attraction for tourists from around the world. And that is important in terms of from a conservation perspective, from a tourism perspective, as well as from an investment in research perspective. So we have that we must protect. We have coastal wildlife parks, and these are parks that are now included in the great white sharks as well as the southern right whales from the so-called the Big 7. So even the whales and the sharks are now being recognized as part of an attraction that attracts lots of tourism. It's important also that we recognize that there's a large and a variety of fossil records that are present in South Africa. Some of these fossils are unique and are unique to just South Africa. We have 75% of all hominid fossils are found in Africa, coming from exclusively South Africa. And that's a high concentration. And what does that mean? It means that this provides a fantastic opportunity for the invitation of international researchers to be able to come into the country and be able to continue their studies around trying to understand the origins of humans, and in terms of the significance of South Africa being a center of human origin. So we know that also there are layers of rock from the Karoo, which holds the world's richest collection of pterapsids, and these are mammal-like fossils which again provide a unique interest from understanding the evolution of reptiles and not forgetting the evolution of humans. Guys, and these are some of important milestones in South Africa in terms of us being able to recognize. And this is Maropeng, and these are home to places where important discoveries in the human evolution timeline have been discovered, from Australopithecus sediba more recently to we're looking at Homo naledi being found. And so these are significant in being able to understand the context of our rich biodiversity, which even is supported with, as I mentioned, fossils. And guys, if you've not had a chance to visit Maropeng, it's probably something that you must do soon in terms of being able to identify and understand the context of why it's such a significant ecological area for us to be able to visit in the context of biodiversity in South Africa. Right, and as I mentioned, it's definitely got some unique rock paintings that we're able to identify. There's fossil evidence of life forms that have existed many years ago, and they form the key to us being able to link together the finds of other fossils from around the world. And so with that, we're able to kind of chronologically put together the timeline of human evolution and where that all began. And so again, the cradle of humankind, as I mentioned, you can find that in Maropeng, and these play a significant role in understanding the context of evolution in South Africa and humans around the world. So as I mentioned, if you do get a chance, please visit these areas. It's also important that we recognize that we have a number of natural or cultural heritage sites that have been declared World Heritage Sites. And that's again significant in terms of our biodiversity. And we've recognized that some of the biomes like the Cape Fynbos, which is home to many endemic species, is again, as I mentioned earlier on, a unique habitat that attracts lots of interest in terms of from an ecological perspective. The Cape Floral Kingdom, I mentioned earlier on, has been declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO because it is considered one of the areas in the world with the richest diversity of plants, and it provides an exceptional value to humanity worldwide. And that's something that we all must celebrate, and that's a unique feature that we have right here in South Africa. Of the 9,600 species of vascular plants that occur here, 70% of these are endemic. And that's a large percentage of plants that are endemic. And we're looking at probably we're looking at about 7,000 of these plants that are found that are unique to this area. And that's a rich diversity, guys. We also know that 17 wetland sites in South Africa that support the diversity of organisms, and from the likes of St. Lucia being a unique habitat, these wetlands provide a unique habitat for organisms in terms of birds as well as some of your amphibians. Again, a World Heritage Site for us to celebrate. Right. It's important that we do recognize that biodiversity is under threat in South Africa, and this comes from threats which include alien invasive species, and these can push out the indigenous plants as well as the endemic flora and fauna. And this is due to the invasion of alien invasive species that have been brought in either through human intervention or accidentally over the years through cargo transportation that have now accidentally brought in these indigenous species. And so that is affecting our indigenous population significantly. The development of human activities such as the development of new suburbs, the clearing of lands for the use of farmers that cause a significant loss of biodiversity. The concept of reclaiming land and filling our wetlands to repurpose them so that we can build golf courses, or we can build new residential complexes. These have a significant impact on our local biodiversity. Again, that's the impact that humans have directly on the environment. So if the biodiversity is threatened, there are several knock-on effects. For example, if there's a loss of species, these in turn can cause the food chains and food webs to collapse. So if we remove or we affect one individual in the flow of energy in a food chain, that will in turn have a knock-on effect on many other species that are dependent on the energy flow in that. The loss of natural heritage makes South Africa a less interesting place, guys. I mean, if we didn't have the big five, we're probably going to have a decrease in tourism. So it's important that the awareness around these is sustained and that we try and carry out initiatives that protect our natural ecosystem so that we can maintain the diversity that we currently have. This affects tourism and the national income negatively. We talk about a lack of tourism in turn decreasing the amount of revenue that comes into a country. There are livelihoods that depend on tourism, from communities that benefit directly, including research funding that is put into our country because of our diversity. So that can have a knock-on effect in terms of the employment of individuals, as well as it increases internally the stress of individuals and may lead to crime because individuals now face the threat of unemployment and lack of earning an income. The loss of flora and fauna could mean that there's a loss of possible cures to diseases. Many of our plants provide a rich supply of natural ingredients that are used for natural remedies. The fact that we've got rooibos, which is unique to South Africa, and that is an example of a plant that is unique in the teas that we have. Again, losing that has a huge impact on what it does in terms of antioxidants. Some food and energy sources for people will also be lost, and we will find that the number of endangered species in the red data list will increase. The red data list is a list that is updated annually, and this has a list of species that are either threatened, near extinction, or endangered. And so we find that this list is a growing list, and often it is because of human impact. And guys, finally, as we wrap this up, it's important that we look at the table below, which shows the number of species of main plants and animal groups or taxa that are present in South Africa. It also includes what percentage of the total number of species on Earth is represented in South Africa. And this is an interesting table where it actually shows you what is the percentage makeup that we have in comparison to the rest of the world. And that is where we start to appreciate what we have and recognize the richness or the uniqueness of our diversity. So when we look at mammals, the number of species in South Africa, we have about 227. And that's about 5.8% of the total percentage on Earth. If you look at birds, birds make up 718 of the number of species in South Africa, which is 8% of the global number of species on Earth. What is interesting is if we look at invertebrates, we have 77,500 different species of invertebrates, and this makes up 5.5% of the percentage of invertebrates throughout the world. And that's unique. What we also recognize is that we've got freshwater fish, guys, and this is a staggering 112 different species. And if you look at those numbers are quite low, and hence we need to recognize that this is something that we need to protect because they're highly vulnerable, as we have that unique 1.3% of the world population of different species here in South Africa. Vascular plants, interestingly, make up 18,000 number of species in South Africa, and that's about 7.5% of the global number of species on Earth. And as we look at that, guys, it's important that we use this information to recognize the significance of maintaining our biodiversity in South Africa.